thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's do introductions.
Well, we've done that.
Okay. So, you've had our email,
Yes, I have.
and I want to know what your response to the Three Demands Bill is.
So I think one of the great things about what you're doing is raising awareness about one of the most important issues of my generation, and I think that is always going to be a welcome point. And now you've asked for people to tell the truth, which I think is exactly what people need to do in politics in this country. I think that's been one of the problems over the last 10 years, 20 years, is that we no longer feel as though people are telling the truth about the issues that are in front of us. So I think that's absolutely something that everyone should be aspiring to. Your second point is obviously saying it's time to act. Now, I believe it is time to act, and I think we've got to make sure that we're following the science that is telling us that our climate is in danger. And I think that I would say that my party is also trying to do that, and I would also like to make sure that I'm a very strong voice to make sure that this issue is actually delivered upon, and that we put in the legislation and the initiatives and the innovation to be able to achieve all the things we can to make ourselves the greenest country in the world. And then your third point, sorry for giving me off the top of my head.
Citizens Assembly.
Citizens Assembly. Well, I'm always a big believer that if we can engage and if we can talk and if we can humanise the discussions that we have, then we can achieve greater things. So if we can have greater engagement on these issues, then I'd be great. I think it's a great way to be able to achieve this.
Okay, that's strong on rhetoric, but short on detail. So let's go into it a bit. First of all, we have a demand of carbon neutrality by 2025.
Yes. So for me, actually, I take the advice that the IPCC has put forward and go for 2050, and the science that I have read from the UN, I think is exactly the correct one to do. But that doesn't mean to say that we don't start putting in as many sort of initiatives as possible to make sure that we are increasing the amount of green renewable power that we are relying on, to make sure that we look at the new technology that is coming out. I think 2050 is the right target to meet, but I'm afraid I understand that a lot of people won't agree with that, but I take the advice from the UN's IPCC.
Well, at the moment, carbon emissions mean that we're on a course for between 4 and 6 degrees. We know that anything above 1.5 degrees is catastrophic.
Yes.
So if 2050 will be way too late.
Well, again,
by the scientists that I've read.
Yes, and this is the problem, is that I'm reading scientists who are saying that actually anything, if we can reduce it by 2050...
May I just interrupt and say that the 2025 target is based on exactly the same science that you are quoting. It's still based upon the IPCC report. And if you look very closely at the way that it is worded, it's saying that we have 12 years before we have catastrophic, irreversible climate change. That means that 2050 is about 20 years too late.
Again, all the scientists and this is the problem, this is why we need to have the discussion. I think if you're going for 2025, I think you end up seeing the breakdown of the way that society may actually even function to achieve this, because it's such radical change.
But
that's
the,
not...
But the consequences of failing to reach that target will also lead to a breakdown. In the words of David Attenborough there.
Anthony Sims of the Rapid Transition Network said that we don't know whether we can reach zero carbon by 2025 unless we try. And you're saying, well, all of these things are, breakdown of society, but we know that in the past there has been rapid transition in this country. For example, the rollout of the rail networks in the UK. For example, the war years. So if there isn't a commitment, then we will not achieve anywhere near what we need to achieve to avert catastrophe.
So one of the extraordinary things that Extinction Rebellion has actually done is that you have all collectively placed this issue front and centre on the debate and the agenda, and I think that's something that's extremely positive. I don't believe in the ability to be able to achieve it by 2025, and I do think, again, from the science I've read, that 2050 is the right target. That's not to say that if I'm elected as a Member of Parliament for Totnes, that I won't be fighting to make sure that we can get everything done to make this country as green as possible and to make sure we can reduce our CO2 emissions.
Stefan's not.
Sorry.
All right.
Sorry.
So, I understand what you're saying, and it's a political decision about how much society can withstand the disruption of an earlier target. I understand that point completely. But what puzzles me is that in April the government declared a climate emergency, and since then it's authorised a third runway at Heathrow Airport. It's financed fracking in Argentina, and it's authorised the opening of a new coal mine in Cumbria. Now, how is this consistent with declaring a climate emergency?
So I think we'll always be able to do better. I don't know about the instances of what you talk about the fracking in Argentina.
I can send you the
no,
links
I'm
if you
not
like.
saying you're wrong. I don't know on that. What I'd say is it's good that we've actually suspended fracking. I would like to see a ban of fracking outright in the United Kingdom. I think it's perfectly evident when you turn around and you start pumping water into the ground and there are earthquakes. This is doing something that is really bad for our landscape. But I think that we are making the right steps, and I think we need to ramp that up. And I'm fully supportive of the fact that we all need to be geared towards the fact that we need to lead the world in the technology that we have.
Okay.
If you may, because I think this is an important point. 1 in 4 of the electric vehicles sold in the European Union, or in the EU, are made in the UK. I think we have the ability to be able to really push forward and sell the technology and trade the technology and help the developing world to have the technology that is green, that will allow them to progress to a stage where they are not polluting the world as well. Because if we've got the technology, we can lead the rest of the world, and that's the role I want to see
Well,
the
the
United
way I
Kingdom
think,
take.
Anthony, we need to lead the world is this is the country in which the Industrial Revolution started. We have had the maximum amount of benefit from carbon. We need to lead the world by reducing the carbon rapidly and transiting towards a country not based on GNP, but based on something like gross national well-being. So what would you say to the kind of changes that we need to move away from the consumer culture that we have at the moment, which is effectively with the corporate, capitalist kind of corporations, which is effectively destroying, eating up, extracting all of the natural wealth of the world. What would you say to that?
So it won't surprise any of you, as I believe in capitalism with responsibility. I believe that actually we need to make sure that if people are making wealth, and that's not a dirty word, if they're making profit, it has to go back towards the benefit of the society.
I hear that. I hear that. In that case, where is the law that is going to make sure that corporations, not just in this country but around the world, are held to account for the destruction of ecosystems
And pay their taxes.
pay their taxes?
I can happily come on to the latter point if you want, but I think this is one of the things that is changing. The debate and the discussion that we're having today is changing the way in which our future generations are going to go and work. It's the fact that I've been into schools across this constituency where it's not about Brexit, it's about climate change being the most important issue. Now, do we think that we're having a workforce that is, the students that are coming out of these schools wanting to go and work for big polluting corporations? I don't, and actually you should be all thanked for the fact that you're raising that profile. I think we are changing the lexicon and the view that people have about the companies they want. You as the consumer, the worker, everything else is changing that mindset, and that is, I think, very effective.
Helen, you've not
Sorry.
asked a question yet. You got one? Or I can
Not right
throw
now.
it out. Okay, Peter.
I just wanted to ask you what your comments on Tom Burke's recent comments. He's the former senior advisor to 3 Conservative environment secretaries, and he, amongst a lot of other people, were very critical of the record of this government. He said that the record is a complete disgrace. So many environmental things have been rolled back since 2015, since the Liberal Democrats left coalition power. And he said that the Conservative government is taking on the same mantle as the American way of doing things, rolling back regulation as much as they can.
So, I don't know about that comment, but you've quoted it to me, so I'll answer it as I hear it from you, which is that I think this country has the potential to lead the world in green technology. And I think we've got to push on with that. I think we've got to make sure that we have the solutions to those countries that need it, that we can help develop. So I would say this, is that while I don't know about the circumstance of that quote, I would say that if I'm elected, and if most of the colleagues I know of mine who are elected, we will end up fighting to make sure we have that technology that can lead and benefit the world in a green and friendly. Yes, please do.
You're coming from the point of view that we are the solution, not the problem. In this country, our per capita consumptions are such that it would take 2.9 Earths if everybody behaved as we do. So the task that we have is to cut our consumption, and especially the top 10% of earners, because they produce 50% of the emissions. So we cannot lecture the rest of the world if we haven't got our act together.
Can I ask you a question? How does that compare with the Indias, the Chinas, the Americas?
Okay, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
With China, we outsource all our manufacturing to them. They produce stuff that gets exported to us.
Yes.
We consume it, and then it's counted as China's emissions.
And we don't count it as ours.
Correct.
Yeah. Fine,
So
well, no,
do you think that's a fair system?
No, well, I mean, I think when we look at what our CO2 emissions are in this country and how we're doing, I think we are doing better than most of the world. Now, I think when you are comparing to China and India and Latin America, we are doing better. And I think we've got to tackle this.
I have to correct you there. If you exclude all air emissions and all sea emissions and all embodied emissions from places like China, then you can say that we're on 44%, but if you take all those into account, we're down to below 10%. So I take issue with your statistics there.
Well, it's just my point of saying that actually I think we are the first developed country in the world to commit to this net zero thing, and I think we have the
Frank,
potential
But you were
Frank,
forced
new
into
question
it
in
by
here. Frank.
us.
That's no bad thing, by the way.
Government's own committee on climate change, which is their official advisors on climate change, have brought out a statement recently saying how the record of the Tory government has been appalling, and they wouldn't even give the government pass marks on their performance over the last few years. And in fact, the government, according to their record, and they're the experts and the government advisors, the government has failed on all but 3 of their 10 targets. What do you say about that?
So, I think the whole of the political system has been desperately distracted by what's been going on since 2016. There's always going to be more that we can do, and I genuinely hope there's going to be a new breed of politician, and I include myself as that, as a 30-year-old, who is going to take up that mantle and fight for what you're talking about and do better. I just don't believe in always having to defend all of government for the sake of it. There is more that we can do, and I passionately believe that you are absolutely right, madam, saying that, if you push the debate to the extent that we're now discussing and in Westminster, that's a good thing. That's a passionate thing. Don't get me wrong, I don't always believe in the methods you do, but you are raising it, and it's becoming something of the lexicon, and it's becoming really important what you're doing.
Sylvia,
Yes, it
yeah,
is.
Thank you.
Thank you for those words. It's disappointing that our government isn't actually leading the way, and that it takes citizens who are putting their own liberty on the line in order to draw attention to what is essentially the single biggest issue. It's an existential issue that has been facing us for decades, but has now reaching the end point. My colleague there, Stefan, who's on hunger strike, and myself, we've put our liberty on the line specifically about the role of aviation. We were both part of Heathrow Pause, and we are facing the consequences of that. So my question to you is in 2 parts. The first is, given that Heathrow is our single biggest aviation global emitter in the UK and one of the biggest in the world, how can it be justifiable, given that their emissions are already exceeding that of 118 countries of the nearly 200 in the United Nations? that we are adding a third runway to this, which will generate another 40% on top. That's about the emissions of Crete, to give it scale. How can you justify that expansion? And my question is, first and foremost, what is your personal position on that? And I have a second part to follow up. But what is your personal position on
So
that?
firstly, while I think the government, if I may, just starting at the very beginning, is that firstly I think the government has not done enough, but we have done things that I think are a step in the right direction, that I think are showing the way for other countries, and I think that's
Like
important
what?
to remember. Well, I think taking that step on 2050 net zero emissions and legislating for it, I do think that is, you don't have to agree with that, but that's fine. I do think that's the right step to make, and I do think it's the
20
right
years
step.
too late.
I think it is the right step to make, and also to make sure that the free market is being able to help us develop the technology and the innovation that's there. Now, with Heathrow, I think the technology, I passionately believe that the technology in aviation will be able to keep up with this. And I think that that is the right thing to do. And I don't think this country shuts itself. I mean, by not having a third runway and not having the infrastructure to do it, I'm afraid I believe that it's the best thing to do for this country, to be able to have the export and import that we do through that of people, of produce, of everything else. I think it's the right thing for this country.
And my second
Yes,
part, if I
sorry.
could just make my second part. Given that famously your leader of the Conservative Party said that he would lie down in front of the bull than admit to having a third runway, given that he said that when he didn't have the power to implement that, but he has now been the Prime Minister for some while and has made no moves whatsoever to implement that, how can you say that we can believe any of the promises that the Tories actually made on climate breakdown?
I mean, in fairness, he's been Prime Minister since the end of July, and that has been
Long
pretty
enough.
pretty beholden to everything that has been about Brexit, unfortunately, and that has taken out the attention of it.
A non-issue.
Well, I mean, a big issue, a
In
massive
terms
issue.
of
but I think,
existential issues,
but in
it's a
terms-
non-issue.
Well, caused by a country voting for what it wanted. But actually, I mean,
by
I would
David
say,
Cameron calling a referendum.
hang on. I'd say that actually, you know, the Prime Minister, if a Conservative government is returned, then this would be back on the agenda and it would be something that would be discussed in Parliament. So, you know, there hasn't been time to put much else on the parliamentary timetable at this point. Thank you for your
Robert?
question.
You said that your party aims for the country to be zero carbon by 2050, which is later than the targets for, I think, for all the other parties.
Well, actually, it's not. Labour is the same now.
2050?
Yeah.
No.
Yes, they have. Their manifesto has moved it from 2030 to 2050.
I need to check.
I promise you, it's 2050. They U-turned on it.
Okay, so, but what interests people most are year by year targets. So does your party have a target for how much it would like to reduce carbon emissions by 2025 and by 2030?
That's a brilliant question, because I think one of the problems at the moment is that we're not on. That's been the big bone of contention, is that we are not on track to reach the 2050 target. So I mean, actually, I would really like to see how we can be able to ramp up the renewable sources of energy that we have in this country, those natural sources that are so prolific across our land. And I think I hope, I can't tell you what's in the manifesto at the moment because I don't know, I didn't give an advance copy of it, but I hope there will be some incentives to make sure that we can push on green technology and to be able to find new spaces for it and to look at new opportunities with it as well. I think it's also about how we approach it as a society and how we are listening to you who are raising this issue. So, I mean, I hope there will be targets. I think that would be a good
Do you
idea.
have any percentage reduction targets, or
I
will they
mean,
be in the
I
manifesto?
don't know. I can't. I would love to give you a fact and a figure, but I just don't know.
Okay, and would that support for renewable technologies include taking away the ban on the power of local authorities to approve wind and solar power schemes, which has been banned since about 2016?
Good question. Something that we should definitely look into, and something that I'd be very happy to look into if I end up winning. I can't answer that at the moment, but yeah. I'd also like to see it be very interesting because we're a rural community here. It's also the role of small businesses that are going to play a factor and a part in this. How our farms and our fisheries will also play a factor in this. You know, one of the most effective ways is carbon sequestering through grassland, not just
There won't
tree
be any
planting.
fish left in 20
But
years.
this is the whole point, is that, you know, if we can keep our soil fertility, which captures more carbon, then we can actually find new innovative ways that work together.
So Helen has a question.
Hi.
Hi, thanks.
You keep saying that since 2016 we've been dreadfully distracted by Brexit, but you know the climate emergency didn't start after 2016.
No, I'm not
I
suggesting
just
it
want to
did.
mention that, you know, we've had decades of inaction, decades. Now my question is, you keep asserting that you think 2050 is a good point to aim for, but you're familiar with what Sylvie pointed out, 12 years to go before catastrophic temperature rises. It's 11 years now, by the way. You're familiar with that?
Well,
you
I've
wouldn't
heard
deny
it.
that.
No, I've heard it made. I don't know that I haven't seen from the scientists that I have seen on television
Just
when
go
they've
to
been
the
engaged.
BBC.
Yeah, but
Television,
when-
I wouldn't rely on the television.
Well, I mean,
If that's where you get your
in
news.
fairness, I was relying on the fact that the Andrew Neil show against one of your representatives and the
I'm sure
UN scientists.
I'm sure you have
on
some
it.
researchers who can help you, and if they don't help you, then we have some that can.
That's very kind, but
Now-
I'm just saying that the science that I have seen from the scientists who've been coming up
On the
against
telly,
your
yeah.
but against your representatives have been saying that this is not the case, and that we've got to be
The
careful
IPC
not to.
say 12 years.
Our representatives are
Have you
not
read it?
pretending to be scientists. We use information from scientists. And just like you're not a scientist either.
No.
You come up here and say what you've heard. Anyway, you're familiar with the 12 or 11 year scenario. And you said money's not a dirty word. Now, we never said it was.
No, no,
You know,
I
and I
wasn't
personally
suggesting
would
what.
dearly love to have some more money. I don't have very much of it. But what's behind that is the notion of continuing growth. And
Yeah.
I really don't think you can continue to have continuing growth, because that's what got us where we are now.
Yeah.
And if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
So, fair point and very well put, but actually I look at it the opposite way, which is that because the mindset is where it is, because we're having this discussion and because we're having this debate, I think we're actually more effective and more able to tackle it through the free markets that we have, through the ability and the systems that we have. There's not a single company I've met here or elsewhere that isn't aware of the climate change issue, isn't aware of the fact that we need to tackle it, and some can do more. And I think there are some big companies that can do more, much more. But I think we've got to do that. And cutting their legs away, cutting their ability, rather than putting the pressure on that is felt across this country within young and old alike, is the much more effective way to do it. And in fairness, if I may say so, the more realistic way of being able to deliver that. Yes.
So are you therefore utterly committed to campaigning for the ecocide being a crime, an international crime? Because if you are giving over power to corporations,
That was my question earlier.
are you utterly committed to ensuring there's an international crime of ecocide so that they are accountable for their actions?
So, on the case of polluter pays and that side of things, I think the polluters should always be held responsible for this side
And
of
we
things.
need
not being held
legislation, we need
responsible.
international legislation that declares that ecocide is a crime.
And there was a consultation earlier this year that was through DEFRA, which was talking about the polluter pay principles. Obviously, there hasn't been the opportunity to be able to
Well,
legislate.
I'm just going to
on it.
interrupt
Yeah.
you there for a minute, Anthony, because what happens is corporations go off to offshore places and they store their money there. They don't pay. They pay zero tax, and they escape any laws because they're like pirates of old. They take the money out of the
system.
world, yeah, and
Us,
out
our pockets.
of the economy. They go to offshore banks and they put it there. They keep the money out of the circulation, impoverishing everybody, and they escape the law. They're not held accountable,
Yep.
and that is absolutely the biggest problem I think that we have. We have to
Hear,
have
hear.
international
Hear, hear.
law. We absolutely
Hear,
have to have
I
it.
believe there was a move
Here, here.
recently to legislate to make that more transparent, and it was withdrawn. We
So there
not
was
acted
always,
upon.
listen, I always want to see companies pay their fair share of tax in the countries in which
This
they
isn't
operate.
about money.
No,
This
well,
is about people
hang on, we've just
committing
been talking about, we've been
crimes.
talking about offshore trusts. That is about money. So that was the
Well,
question. So
that's,
if I may,
that's
I'll
true,
answer.
but you keep bringing up money.
No,
well,
let him-
in fairness, that was the question that was
actually,
asked also.
ecocide is
Let him
about
an- let
a
him
crime.
answer.
That
No,
was-
just let me say, ecocide is about creating a crime.
Against-
that means
yeah.
that people would go to prison. They wouldn't just have to pay fines.
No,
It
good
means
point.
that the authorities would investigate what they'd done and make charges under that law, and then they would be tried.
That cannot happen at the moment. That's why we need this law. That's all
I think
I'm
we're
trying
moving
to
in a
say.
stage where we are all conscious of the fact that we need to work on this and we need to work together. And I think the firms of the 21st century are also driving in that direction. And that is what
There's
the way
no
I think it's
evidence
gonna
to show that at all.
No.
Well,
And
I
at
think
the
there
moment-
is, because
and
how
at the
we
moment,
go out and how we work
under
and
the
how we
present
do these
Prime
things.
Minister, this country, at least London, is set to become a place where corporations can come and pay virtually zero tax, if not
I think we've got to get away from this concept of just thinking that corporations don't contribute to our economies. Corporations employ thousands of people, pay national insurance.
What you mean,
do
like Amazon?
Do pensions?
And look at
yes,
the,
but
look at the workers in Amazon. They are struggling to work. You know, they've got little things on them that buzz to make sure that they do, you know.
And that's why we create a vibrant economy which comes through green technology, that comes through the ability to work in different fields and to be able to have an economy that thrives, that tackles this issue. We can lead
Okay,
the world.
one last question, and we'll have to
And
stop
zero
there.
contracts. By the way, Taylor Review, 73% of people on zero-hour contracts, according to the Taylor Review, an independent review, turned around saying that there was more job satisfaction in zero-hour contracts than there was in full-time employment.
Well, I haven't seen the
Anthony,
statistics.
one last question.
Taylor
We
Review,
haven't
you'll have
really
to-
talked about citizens' assembly. We need a citizens' assembly to free governments from having to go to the electorate and try to persuade the electorate. We need a citizens' assembly to have teeth, to have regulatory power. What do you say to that?
I'm afraid it won't surprise you that I'm not as pro Citizens Assembly, but I am pro the engagement that we have and the listening that we have with groups like you. I don't believe that. I think we have a Citizens Assembly, by the way. I think it's called Westminster, and I think Westminster has been desperately caught
The
short.
same way.
Well, it is.
I mean, it's been
Insane.
The
caught
first
short.
past the post
Elitist
system means
group.
that people are effectively disenfranchised.
Listen, we had a referendum on changing the voting system in 2011. It was,
We need to
firstly,
do it
a
again
very low
because it's
turnout.
very clear.
Well, do you know, but this is not the issue. Well, it was about an alternative vote.
alternative vote system, which
Yes,
isn't
absolutely.
proportional representation.
But it's a fair. It was
And
a
so we
different
have a
system
system in our
promoted by the
country
Liberal
now.
Democrats.
I'm sorry,
Nobody
we
wanted.
have to be fair to all the other candidates who came. It's been a lively debate.
Thank you.
And I want to thank Anthony
Thank you
for
very much
coming
for having me.
and wish you best luck.
Thank
in
you very
your-
much. Thank you.
in your
Okay,
Thank you
thank
very
you
much.
for coming.
Thank you, and thank you very much. for having me.